My daughter, Lily declared. I must earn my food. When the doctors later documented the marks on her skin, the judge would suspend my mother's visitation rights and return my child fully to my care. It all began when I was picking Lily up from my mother, Aliner's house, and she met me at the door not with a hug but with a manila folder. Child Protective Services visited yesterday. There is an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday. My stomach plummeted into an icy void. What? That's unthinkable. It must be a mistake. For child abandonment, I tore the folder open, my hands trembling. Inside was a petition for emergency custody. Aliner, what on earth did you tell them? Just then, Lily appeared in the doorway, her posture impossibly perfect, like a little porcelain doll. Good evening, Mother. Thank you for coming to recover me. I froze solid. This was the same 5-year-old child who just last week had gleefully insisted on calling butterflies flutterbees. I reached for her, a desperate, instinctual gesture, but she remained rigid, unyielding. You left me for 3 whole days. You are always leaving me. Grandmother Aliner is the one who takes care of me. Her voice was utterly flat, devoid of emotion, as if she were reciting lines from a play she'd been forced to memorize. I am helping her mature into a proper young woman, my mother added, a smug grin spreading across her face. I will see you in court. I scooped Lily into my arms and carried her to the car, my mind a whirlwind of panic and confusion. I had a mere 72 hours to prove my daughter had been brainwashed, or I would lose her to the system and to the monster who had done this. As Lily methodically buckled her seatbelt, I saw them. Dark, angry purple bands encircling both of her delicate wrists. Lily, my sweet girl, what happened to you? Grandmother advises that decent girls do not grumble about necessary adjustments. Back at our home, Lily walked directly to a corner and stood facing the wall. You can sit down, sweetie. You're home now. She did not budge. I have not completed my reflection time. Her small voice cracked on the last word. What is reflection time? She fell silent, and her entire small body began to tremble uncontrollably. I pulled her into my arms, trying to offer comfort, but she went stiff as a board again, her lips moving as she mumbled numbers. 97, 98, 99. Why are you counting, baby? I must get to the number, or I have to go back to the special room. The words had barely escaped her mouth when she wet herself, right there in my embrace, a 5-year-old shivering with a terror I couldn't comprehend. After I had cleaned her up and changed her clothes, she went right back to her corner and resumed counting. As I frantically searched Google for emergency child therapists, my neighbor Denise called. She had lived next door to my mother for 2 decades. I don't mean to be a nosy Parker, she said, her voice laced with concern, but I wanted you to know that on Thursday night, I could hear your little Lily counting for hours, coming from the basement. It was just numbers, echoing up through the foundation vents. I thanked her profusely before hanging up, the timeline clicking into place. 55 hours remained. The next morning, Lily refused to eat the breakfast I made for her. Only good girls who complete their lessons are permitted to receive meals. I drove straight to my mother's house, every second feeling like a lifetime. She was in her garden, humming a hymn as if it were just another peaceful Saturday morning. What is the special room, Mom? She smiled, not even bothering to look up from her prize-winning roses. Children have such vivid and wild imaginations, don't they? She is traumatized, Aliner. What have you done to her? I have improved her. Most people would be willing to pay a premium for such remarkable transformations. You are most welcome. She finally met my gaze, her eyes cold and hard. With the appropriate time-tested tactics, even little brats can be shaped into lovely young ladies. You taught her to lie to me. I taught her to tell the truth. Good girls do not share fanciful stories. She turned her attention back to her roses. See you on Monday. Do not be late again. The rest of the day was a living nightmare. I took the day off from work to try and connect with Lily, but she would not deviate from her robotic script. CPS was not returning any of my frantic calls. 40 hours remained. That night, Lily insisted on going to bed sitting perfectly upright, her lips still moving with silent counting. I drifted off in the armchair next to her bed, exhausted and defeated. It was 2:00 a.m. when a blood-curdling scream jolted me awake. Please, I have counted to 10,000. I counted all the way to the end. Please let me out. It is so dark. But she was no longer in her bed. I sprinted downstairs to our own basement, where I found her standing in a corner, trembling. The special room at grandmother's is down here. She pointed to a section of the concrete wall. But we cannot open it. Only Granny has the key to open it. I love Granny. She looks after me when you abandon me. I felt a desperate urge to tear my own hair out. I managed to schedule an emergency appointment with a therapist for the next morning, but I knew that official evaluations could take weeks. She would not be able to testify in court by Monday. I tried recording Lily on my phone, assuring her that this was a safe space and that I loved her unconditionally, but she just kept repeating her lines, her eyes dead and vacant. You abandoned me repeatedly. I drove back to my mother's house, my phone recording from my pocket. Tell me everything you did to my daughter. Within minutes, the police were there, escorting me off the property for harassment. Eleanor waved cheerfully from her porch as they led me away. Tick-tock. 12 hours to go. I was completely out of options and running out of time. In a final act of desperation, I contacted my brother, Daniel, who had served in the Special Forces. 10 years of making hardened terrorists talk. I need your help. He knew enough about our mother's history to not ask any questions, responding simply with, "Oh my God." Daniel arrived with 2 men I recognized from his unit. We drove in separate vehicles. The spare key to Eleanor's house was still hidden under the fake rock by the porch, just where it had been for years. Daniel gave a silent signal to his teammates. My mother awoke around 2:00 a.m., just 7 hours before court, to find 3 men in full tactical gear standing silently around her bed. Daniel zip-tied her wrists as she sputtered incoherently about assault charges and lawsuits. They escorted her down to her own basement, to the very spot where Lily had been so terrified of a bolted door. Daniel set up a small camera on a tripod, its lens aimed at her. Her face went ashen. You have 6 hours to explain precisely what you did to Lily. Begin with day 1, hour 1. His hand went to the doorknob of the ominous-looking door. What is in this room that makes a 5-year-old child count to 10,000? She was shaking violently now, her gaze locked on that door. Please don't. The woman who had been smiling serenely in her garden just yesterday was now a sobbing, pleading wreck. 6 hours until court. Start talking. She remained defiantly mute. He picked the lock with a tool from his vest. Click. The door swung inward and the stench hit me first. A foul mixture of old sweat, industrial cleaning supplies, and the metallic tang of pure panic. Daniel shone his powerful flashlight into the darkness, and I saw everything at once. A tiny, closet-sized chamber with raw concrete walls covered in scratches. thousands upon thousands of tiny vertical lines, organized in groups of 5. The digital timer mounted on the wall was still glowing red, the number 10,000 frozen on its display. A drain was set into the middle of the floor, surrounded by dark, ominous stains that made my stomach churn violently. My mother began to wail louder behind us as Daniel stepped inside, his camera documenting every horrific detail. He moved methodically, capturing every inch of the space while I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move. The walls held more than just tally marks. Words were also carved crudely into the concrete. "I am a good girl" appeared over and over in wobbly, childish handwriting. On a small shelf, Daniel found a thick ledger and gently opened it. Page after page was filled with my mother's flawless, elegant cursive, detailing dates, times, and lessons. The first entry from 3 days ago was about how Lily needed to learn that good girls remain silent. Daniel filmed each page as I read over his shoulder, my blood running cold as I recognized the exact phrases Lily had been repeating. Good girls do not grumble about necessary adjustments. Page 2 contained specific instructions for applying wrist restraints for maximum compliance. A control panel next to the timer had buttons labeled in my mother's handwriting. "Start counting," "Reset on failure," and "Add 1,000 for talking back" were written on pieces of tape next to each button. Small, wrist-sized metal cuffs were bolted to the floor beside the drain. Remnants of purple fabric were still caught in the metal where it had scraped against skin. I took photos with my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly that the images were blurry. Daniel discovered more ledgers on the shelf, older ones with different names on the covers. One of them had my name on it, dated 30 years ago. I opened it, and my world tilted on its axis. The same lessons, the same phrases, the same systematic breakdown of a child. A memory, buried for decades, erupted in my mind with such force that I had to grab the doorframe to keep from collapsing. I was 4 years old, locked in a dark room just like this one, counting and counting until my voice was a raw whisper. My mother was outside in the garden, humming church hymns while I screamed numbers at cold, unforgiving concrete walls. I had buried it all so deep that I had convinced myself it was just a recurring nightmare. But here was the proof, undeniable and damning, in her own handwriting. Daniel continued recording as his teammate checked his watch and tapped his wrist. We had about an hour before the neighbors started waking up and might notice the unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway. My mother was still screaming and begging, but Daniel ignored her completely. We gathered the ledgers, and I took more photos of the room from every possible angle. Another team member zip-tied my mother's ankles before they carried her out to one of their vehicles. Daniel assured me they would not harm her, but he would ensure she was kept away from any phones until well after the court hearing. I ran to my car, clutching Lily's ledger and the one bearing my own name. My hands were so unsteady that I could barely turn the key in the ignition. From the car, I called Dr. Keller's emergency number and left a frantic message, explaining that Lily required an urgent examination. He called back within 5 minutes and agreed to meet us at his office at 7:00 a.m., giving us barely 2 hours before the hearing. A wave of relief washed over me, but I knew we still had a mountain to climb. My phone vibrated with a text from Rachel Monroe, the family lawyer I had messaged in a panic earlier. She agreed to meet us at the hospital right after Lily's exam, but warned me to be extremely cautious with the evidence I presented. She stated unequivocally that anything collected unlawfully could not be used in court. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. I had definitive proof of systematic generational child abuse, but I might not be able to use it to save my daughter. I drove home and sat in my driveway for a long minute, trying to compose myself before going inside. It was nearly 6:00 a.m., and I needed to wake Lily up soon. I found her curled up in her bed, her lips moving silently in her sleep. 4,847, 4,848, 4,849. Her small voice sounded hoarse from counting all night. I sat on the edge of her bed and gently caressed her back until she opened her eyes. She immediately started counting aloud, and I helped her get dressed while she continued. 512, 513. I made her some toast, but she refused to eat it. We got into the car, and she sat perfectly still in her booster seat. Every time the turn signal clicked on, she flinched and whispered under her breath, "Good girls don't complain." Good girls don't complain. I squeezed the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The pediatrician's office was only a 20-minute drive, but it felt like an eternity. Lily counted all the way to 6,000, restarting at 1 when she got distracted. Dr. Keller was waiting for us in the parking lot and led us directly to an exam room. He was gentle and kind with Lily, but meticulously thorough, photographing her wrists from every angle. He documented her rigid posture and her refusal to make eye contact. When he asked her questions, she only responded with the same rehearsed lines about being abandoned. He escorted me into the hallway while his nurse stayed with Lily. "I have to report this to CPS immediately," he said in a low, serious voice. "Something feels off about how quickly Daniel and his team moved on your mother. 3 Special Forces operators conducting a middle-of-the-night operation in suburbia. The timing seems awfully convenient, arriving just when you needed them and finding that hidden room so easily." Half of me was terrified, but another part felt validated that someone else saw the gravity of what had happened to her. Dr. Keller typed up his report and handed me a copy while Lily sat on the exam table, counting softly under her breath. We walked out to the parking lot, where a woman in a sharp gray suit was leaning against a Honda Civic, looking at her phone. She looked up and extended her hand. "Rachel Monroe. You must be Sarah, Lily's mother." I nodded numbly and shook her hand while Lily stood stiffly beside me. Rachel glanced at the medical paperwork I was holding and asked if she could see it. She scanned it quickly, her eyes darting across the pages. "We have approximately 90 minutes until court. We need to build a defense that focuses solely on what we can legally prove." She looked down at Lily, who was staring at the ground, counting. "There will be no mention of what happened last night, nothing about how you discovered what you found. We work with what we have." I strapped Lily into her car seat while Rachel got into her Honda and followed us to the police station. Inside, the desk officer handed me documents to fill out for a child abuse report. I wrote carefully, focusing on Lily's bruises, her behavior, and the doctor's official findings. I omitted any mention of the secret room or how I learned of its existence. The officer reviewed my statement and shook his head grimly. "These investigations can take weeks, sometimes months. This won't be ready for tomorrow's hearing." Rachel stood beside me, nodding as if she had expected exactly this. We walked back to the parking lot where Rachel stopped me near her car. "Listen, I understand you have video evidence. I can see it on your face, but we absolutely cannot use it. Anything obtained by breaking and entering is inadmissible. She saw my face fall. We have Lily's behavior, the medical proof, and we will have witness testimony. That has to be enough. She took out her phone and called the Child Advocate Center. Miraculously, they had an opening for a forensic interview at 3:00 p.m. Rachel told me it wouldn't be completed in time for the morning hearing, but we had to try. The system moved at a glacial pace, but every single piece of documented evidence was vital. I drove to Denise's house, and Rachel followed. Denise was waiting on her porch with a notebook in her hand, having already started writing down what she remembered. Rachel sat with her at the kitchen table and helped her draft an official statement about hearing Lily counting from the basement window on Thursday night. Denise signed it, and Rachel, ever prepared, notarized it using a stamp from her briefcase. One piece of independent, legally obtained evidence was secured. Rachel then helped me write my own affidavit once I returned home. I sat at my kitchen table while Lily stood in the living room corner, counting. Rachel asked me targeted questions while typing on her laptop. I admitted that I had, on occasion, been late picking Lily up from my mother's house due to my work schedule. Sometimes by 30 minutes, once by an hour, but never for days or anything approaching abandonment. Rachel helped me word everything precisely so that I could accept my minor faults while refuting the outrageous charges. We were walking a fine line between telling the complete truth and protecting ourselves legally. My phone rang as Rachel was printing out the affidavit. The caller ID showed the police department. Rachel took the phone from my hand before I could even answer. "This is Rachel Monroe, attorney for Lily's mother. Yes, Detective Holt. My client will be available for an interview tomorrow afternoon after the custody hearing." "No, not before then. Thank you." She hung up and looked at me, her expression grim. "Your mother has filed an assault complaint. We knew this was coming." My hands started to shake again. Rachel sat down with me and calmly explained my rights. "If anyone asks you about last night, you will invoke your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Even better, we avoid the question entirely." She had me repeat one simple sentence over and over. I was home with my daughter. I must have repeated it 20 times until it sounded natural, even though my voice trembled. That is all you say to anyone. You were home with Lily. There is nothing else to add. She made me repeat it again. We arrived at the Child Advocate Center at 3:00 p.m., but the forensic interviewer was running behind schedule. We waited in the lobby for an hour, with Lily sitting perfectly still beside me. When they finally called us back, the interviewer explained that she could only conduct a preliminary assessment today. The full interview would require several sessions. Lily went into the room alone, and I watched through a one-way mirror. She answered every question with her rehearsed script about being abandoned. The interviewer noted Lily's emotional detachment and rigid responses in her report, but stated she couldn't determine the cause without more sessions. We were left with yet another piece of incomplete, yet suggestive, evidence. Rachel drove me home and told me she would file all of our documentation with the court before it closed for the day. She agreed to meet us at the courthouse tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. sharp. After she left, I tried to persuade Lily to eat dinner, but she refused. Good girls earned their food. She stood in her customary corner, counting. At 8:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Teresa Alvarez from CPS stood on my porch, holding a clipboard. I'm here to conduct the emergency home visit, as per Dr. Keller's report. Even though my stomach was in knots, I let her in. Lily was now sitting on the couch, maintaining her perfect posture and counting softly. 412, 413. Teresa sat in the chair across from her, observing quietly. She made notes on her clipboard about Lily's counting and her rigid stance. She took photos of Lily's room with her phone. She asked Lily gentle questions and received the same robotic responses about being a good girl and not complaining. After an hour of observation, Teresa packed up her things. I will have my preliminary report ready for court tomorrow. There are obvious signs of trauma here. She looked at Lily, who was still counting. Whatever happened to her, she needs help. After Teresa left, I sat near Lily on the couch, but she slid away from me and continued her count. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Keller's office. I opened the attachment as Lily sat at the table, eating her dry cereal one piece at a time, counting between each bite. The report stated the injuries were consistent with restraint patterns, but it was impossible to determine who had caused them. My hand shook as I forwarded it to Rachel, who replied that it was enough to raise serious alarm, even if it wasn't the definitive proof we needed. Lily finished exactly 20 pieces of cereal and pushed the bowl away. I drove her to the Child Advocate Center for her scheduled forensic interview. From the outside, the building looked like an ordinary house, with toys in the windows. Lily walked beside me with perfect posture, her hands folded primly in front of her. The interviewer, a woman with kind gray hair, spoke softly to Lily as I watched from the observation room. Lily sat ramrod straight in the little chair, answering each question with the same flat, emotionless tone about being abandoned. When the interviewer asked about a special room, Lily's eyes went completely blank, and she stared at the wall for a full 30 seconds before resuming her count. The interviewer noted the signs of dissociation and trauma, but repeated that she would need more sessions to uncover what had happened. We left with another fragmentary report that showed something was terribly wrong but couldn't point a finger at who did it. Teresa called me at home and asked if she could stop by with some information she'd found. She arrived 20 minutes later and sat at my kitchen table while Lily stood in her corner. Teresa pulled out a folder and showed me 2 prior complaints filed against my mother from years ago. One was from my cousin in 2018 and another from my aunt in 2015. Both had been marked unfounded because the children involved had refused to speak. The pattern was laid out in black and white, but CPS had never connected the dots. Rachel came over that evening after Lily was in bed. She watched Daniel's video on my phone, pausing it to write down specific phrases from my mother's ledger. She reiterated that we couldn't use the video itself in court, but we could use the knowledge gained from it to ask the right questions. She meticulously wrote down every phrase Lily had been repeating and cross-referenced it with the entries in my mother's handwriting. After Rachel left, I sat alone at midnight and watched the video again. The logbook detailed dates going back 3 weeks with comprehensive notes on Lily's training sessions. Each entry corresponded exactly to something Lily had said. My mother had written about counting exercises, dietary restrictions, and something she called posture practice. My rage grew as I read about sessions of time seclusion that ranged from 1 hour to 6 hours over several days. I desperately wanted to upload this video for the world to see, but I knew it would jeopardize our entire case if the break-in became public knowledge. Rachel had made it clear that illegally obtained evidence would make me look unstable and could cost me Lily forever. I deleted the video from my phone, but I saved screenshots of the most crucial pages in a password-protected folder. The next morning, I went on Facebook and found that my mother had shared a dozen photos of Lily from church events over the past year. In every picture, Lily looked happy, with wide smiles that I now understood were completely forced. My mother had written lengthy captions about being a devoted grandmother who had to step in when her own daughter couldn't handle the responsibilities of parenting. Rachel took screenshots of everything and warned me that this was the beginning of a public relations campaign to paint my mother as the stable, reliable caregiver. That afternoon, Rachel asked me to tell her everything about my own childhood. I hadn't planned to bring it up, but the words just came tumbling out. I told her about being locked in a dark closet as a 4-year-old, counting to stay sane while my mother went shopping. I remembered the gnawing hunger when my mother decided I hadn't earned my food. I remembered the endless posture training and the scripts I had to memorize about being grateful. Rachel listened without judgment and then explained how my own experience, while painful to revisit, would help our case by demonstrating a clear pattern of abuse across generations. Rachel seemed suspiciously prepared for every single move here, as if she had performed this identical dance previously, and she was aware of the video footage before anyone revealed it. Having that notary stamp ready in her briefcase, she cut off the detective mid-call. She said testifying about it would be difficult, but it could be the very thing that saved Lily. She made me understand that this wasn't about proving I was a perfect mother. It was about keeping Lily safe. The court didn't want a perfect parent, just one who wouldn't systematically harm her child. She explained that my work schedule and occasional tardiness in picking up Lily were normal parental struggles, nothing compared to the methodical abuse my mother had inflicted. We spent 2 hours going over all the evidence we had and every witness who could testify. Denise would talk about the counting she overheard. Dr. Keller would present the medical evidence. The forensic interviewer would discuss Lily's trauma responses. Teresa would describe the history of prior complaints, and Rachel would tie it all together to show that Lily was in imminent danger with my mother. Rachel's phone rang, and she put it on speaker. The court clerk was calling to inform us that our case had been assigned to Judge Whittaker. Rachel's face tightened as she thanked the clerk and hung up. She told me that Whittaker was known for his strong belief in keeping families together whenever possible. He rarely removed children from their grandparents and required overwhelming evidence before taking such a step. We would have to adjust our entire strategy to convince a judge who was predisposed to believe that grandmothers don't harm their grandchildren. Rachel stayed until 11:00 p.m. that night, reworking our entire approach. At 7:30 a.m., my phone rang. A man identified himself as Simon Caldwell, the guardian ad litem assigned to Lily's case. He explained that he would be present in court to observe Lily and provide an independent recommendation to the judge regarding her best interests. His tone was calm and professional as he asked a few basic questions about Lily's current state. While Lily sat at the kitchen table, arranging her cereal pieces in perfect rows, I told him about the incessant counting and her rigid mannerisms. He said he would look for those behaviors in court and asked if I could bring Lily early so he could observe her in the waiting area. After I hung up, Detective Holt called again about my mother's assault allegations, stemming from the break-in she suspected had occurred. Rachel immediately took my phone and informed him that any interview would have to wait until after the custody hearing that morning. She scheduled it for the following afternoon and informed him that I would be accompanied by counsel during any questioning. The detective was clearly not pleased but agreed to the delay, acknowledging that the custody matter took precedence. Daniel texted me, saying he wanted to leak the video online to expose what our mother had done to Lily. I immediately replied with a firm, absolutely not. We couldn't take any risks that would undermine the custody case. He sent 3 more texts, insisting that people needed to know what she was capable of doing to children. I called him and pleaded with him to delete the video from all his devices immediately. He finally agreed, but I could hear the frustration in his voice as he promised to stay silent until after the court hearing. Rachel picked us up at 8:15 and drove us to the courthouse in her car, wanting to go over our strategy one last time on the way. Lily sat in the back, counting softly as we reviewed the evidence. When we arrived at the courthouse, Lily's counting sped up as we rode the escalator, the mechanical rhythm seeming to match her numbers. The metal steps clicked in time with her voice as she reached 200, then 300, her pace accelerating. I quickly steered her to a quiet corner near a water fountain and opened a white noise app on my phone. The steady static sound broke the rhythm, and Lily's counting slowed as she focused on the new sound. Remembering Dr. Keller's advice about grounding techniques, I started having Lily name objects she could see in the hallway. She pointed to a painting, then a bench, and finally a plant, and her count dropped from the thousands down to 98, 97, 96. Simon Caldwell was standing nearby, and I saw him jotting down notes about Lily's behavior and my response to it. When Lily's count dropped below 50, he gave a slight nod, and she seemed to relax a little. With only 8 minutes before our hearing, Rachel rushed to the clerk's office with our emergency exhibits. She submitted the medical photos of Lily's wrists, Denise's signed statement about the counting, and CPS's preliminary notes. The clerk stamped each document and added it to our official file. Rachel returned, looking satisfied that we had successfully filed our evidence in time for the judge to consider it. In the hallway outside the courtroom, a mother with 2 young children was trying to keep them occupied with coloring books. One of the kids asked Lily if she wanted to color too, holding out a crayon to her. Lily stood perfectly straight and replied in that flat tone, "Good girls don't play with toys during important times." The little boy looked confused, and his mother gently pulled him back as Simon scribbled more notes about Lily's reaction. He asked Lily what she meant by good girls, and she simply repeated the phrase 3 more times without any emotion. The bailiff called our case number, and we entered the courtroom, where my mother was already seated with her counsel at the opposing table. Judge Whittaker entered and quickly established the ground rules for the day's emergency hearing, which would focus solely on immediate safety and temporary custody. He made it clear that we were not there to argue the entire case, but simply to determine where Lily should reside while the investigation was ongoing. My mother sat across the courtroom with perfect posture and a demure smile as her lawyer arranged papers on their table. Teresa Alvarez took the stand first as the CPS investigator. She described finding Lily constantly counting in the corner of my living room and her rigid adherence to unspoken rules. She testified about Lily's scripted phrases and flat emotional responses, which she stated were indicative of coaching or conditioning. She informed the judge that she was recommending further investigation and immediate safety measures to protect Lily from further psychological harm. Her professional opinion was that Lily was showing clear signs of trauma and needed immediate help, regardless of the source. Dr. Keller took the stand next, carrying a folder with the photographs of Lily's wrists. He showed the judge the purple bruising patterns, testifying that they were consistent with restraint marks, such as zip ties or rope. He described Lily's fearful reaction to being offered food and her insistence that only good girls who completed their lessons were allowed to eat. He testified about her rigid posture and her refusal to sit down, even when asked, during the examination. He concluded that, in his medical opinion, Lily had been subjected to systematic conditioning that had resulted in specific behavioral responses to everyday situations. The judge examined the photos closely and asked Dr. Keller if he could determine who had caused the injuries. Dr. Keller stated that he couldn't identify a specific person, but the injuries were clearly intentional and not accidental. He also added that Lily's psychological symptoms pointed to prolonged exposure to whatever conditioning methods had been used on her. The forensic interviewer from the Child Advocacy Center took the stand next, opening her folder and adjusting her glasses. She described meeting Lily the previous afternoon and observing her count to 300 before she would even acknowledge anyone's presence in the room. She read from her notes about Lily's flat tone when repeating phrases about being a good girl who doesn't complain. She described how, when asked about a special room, Lily became completely still, her eyes going blank as if she were no longer mentally present. The interviewer testified that this kind of shut-down behavior is common in children who have been exposed to situations their minds cannot process. She testified that Lily showed clear signs of having been coached to say certain things, but she could not identify who had done the coaching. She referred to her report, where she concluded that Lily exhibited numerous trauma indicators, including rigid body language and programmed responses. The judge took notes as she explained that Lily's behaviors were undoubtedly the result of psychological injury. Rachel then submitted Denise's written statement to the clerk, who read it into the record. The clerk read Denise's account of living next to my mother's house for 20 years, and hearing Lily counting from the basement window last Thursday night. Denise had written that the counting went on for at least 3 hours, with only the sound of numbers in Lily's small voice echoing up through the windows. She wrote that she had heard the numbers in the hundreds and had considered calling someone but didn't know what to say. The judge's expression shifted slightly as the clerk read the part about the counting coming from the basement. His pen stopped moving, and he looked up from his notes for the first time since the hearing began. My mother's lawyer stood up, adjusted his tie, and began to present their side of the story. He produced work records showing the times I had been late picking up Lily from my mother's house. He presented my time cards from the restaurant where I often picked up extra shifts on weekends. He read statements from people at my mother's church, testifying to what a wonderful, patient, and loving grandmother she was. The church ladies had written about her patience and her dedication to raising children with good manners and respect. He argued that I was an unstable parent who prioritized my job over my daughter, relying on my elderly mother for free childcare. He claimed that Lily's behaviors were nothing more than a child's overactive imagination, coached by me to lie about her loving grandmother. He showed the court photos of Lily at church functions, looking clean and well-dressed in my mother's care. Denise's statement about Lily counting in the basement for hours cast a dark shadow on their narrative, making one wonder why my mother would have her down there at all. The professionally produced church photos of a smiling Lily stood in stark contrast to the rigid, counting child before them today. Rachel called me to the stand, and my legs felt like lead as I walked to the witness chair. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth, while Lily sat in the back row, counting under her breath. Rachel asked me about my work schedule, and I admitted that yes, I worked long hours to keep a roof over our heads. I explained that being a single mother meant making hard choices, but I had never abandoned Lily for days as my mother claimed. I described finding Lily with bruises on her wrists and her terror of a secret room. I told the judge how Lily had wet herself out of fear and refused to eat unless she was a good girl. My voice shook, but I continued, detailing how she would stand in corners for hours for something she called reflection time. I told them about her counting to 10,000 and how she became rigid and cold when I tried to hug her. The opposing lawyer stood up for cross-examination and immediately brought up my visit to my mother's house. He asked if I had gone there and accused her of harming Lily, which I admitted I had. He tried to paint me as harassing an elderly woman who had done nothing but help raise my child. I kept my composure and stated that I just needed to know what had happened to make Lily so terrified. I told him I had knocked on the door and asked my mother about the secret room. When she refused to answer and called the police, I left without arguing or causing a scene. The lawyer pressed, asking if I had been escorted off the property by police for harassment. I explained that yes, the police had asked me to leave, and I had complied immediately and peacefully. I reiterated that my only concern was getting Lily help and understanding what she had been through. He tried to make me look unstable, but I kept my answers short, truthful, and focused on Lily. Judge Whittaker then turned to Simon Caldwell and asked for his recommendation as the court-appointed guardian for Lily's best interests. The entire courtroom went silent as Simon stood up from his seat in the gallery, where he had been taking notes all morning. He walked to the podium, holding a binder filled with his observations. He recounted seeing Lily in the hallway tell another child that good girls don't play during important times. He noted her rigid posture and the way she had counted relentlessly, even as other witnesses testified. He told the judge that he had observed clear signs of conditioning, including scripted phrases and fear-based responses. He recommended that Lily remain in my care for the duration of the investigation, with absolutely no unsupervised contact between her and my mother. He stated that removing Lily from my care at this time would cause additional trauma, given her current fragile psychological state. He emphasized Lily's need for stability and therapeutic intervention, not more disruption in her life. The judge looked from my table to my mother, before his gaze settled on Lily, who was still sitting with perfect posture in the back row. He stated that he had grave concerns about both households, but Lily's immediate safety had to be the top priority. He emphasized that this was a temporary ruling, pending the full investigation over the coming weeks. He ordered that I would retain temporary custody under strict conditions, including mandatory therapy for Lily and full cooperation with CPS. He suspended my mother's visitation rights entirely until the conclusion of the investigation, with the exception of supervised visits at a neutral location if recommended by Lily's therapist. He ordered a 30-day review hearing to assess Lily's progress and the results of the investigation. A tidal wave of relief washed over me, but I knew this was only the first battle in a long war. Judge Whittaker began listing the conditions as I held Lily's hand tighter. He ordered immediate therapy to begin this week with a court-approved child psychologist specializing in trauma. CPS was to create a safety plan for our home within 48 hours, outlining specific rules we had to follow. The review hearing was set for 30 days from today to check on Lily's progress and reevaluate the situation. He made it very clear that this was temporary custody, and any violation of his orders would result in Lily's immediate removal from my care. The court clerk typed furiously as Lily continued to count under her breath, now at 300 and climbing. Judge Whittaker signed the order, and the bailiff distributed copies to both lawyers before calling the next case. We stepped out of the courthouse into the hallway, where my mother was waiting by the elevator with her lawyer. She blocked our path and announced loudly, for everyone to hear, that she was filing a defamation lawsuit against me for the lies I had told in court. Her lawyer took out his phone and started recording as she accused me of breaking into her home and terrorizing an elderly woman in the middle of the night. Rachel grabbed my arm and steered me toward the stairs, whispering that we had anticipated this and to just keep walking without responding. Lily pressed against my leg and continued counting, her voice a little louder now, at 400. My mother followed us down the stairs, shouting about assault charges and how Daniel would pay for what he had done to her. Rachel kept us moving forward, through the lobby and out the front doors, where the sunlight hit us like a physical blow after the dimness of the courtroom. My car was parked 3 blocks away, and Rachel walked with us the entire way, my mother's threats echoing behind us. After Lily was buckled into her car seat, Rachel leaned through my window and told me that Detective Aaron Holt from the police department would need to interview me about my mother's complaint. She had already scheduled it for tomorrow afternoon at 2:00 p.m., and promised she would be present for every question. Her firm had dealt with Holt on previous allegation cases, so she knew exactly how to handle his interrogation style. She warned me not to speak to anyone, especially Daniel or anyone else who might have been involved that night, about anything before tomorrow's interview. Lily fell asleep on the ride home, her lips still moving with silent numbers, even in her dreams. The next afternoon, I sat in a sterile police station interview room with Rachel by my side as Detective Holt set up his recording equipment. He was younger than I had expected, with sharp, observant eyes that seemed to notice everything, from how I sat to where I placed my hands on the table. He started with basic questions about my relationship with my mother and how often Lily stayed at her house for childcare. I explained that my work schedule sometimes required my mother to pick Lily up from school and watch her until I got home late. He asked about the custody hearing and what led to the emergency petition being filed against me. I told him about discovering Lily's condition when I picked her up and my concerns about her drastic change in behavior. He then pressed for details about the night before the hearing, specifically where I was and what I did between midnight and 6:00 a.m. Rachel subtly touched my arm, and I simply stated, I was at home with my daughter, preparing for court the next morning. Holt showed me photos of my mother's wrists, which had red marks on them, and asked if I knew how she had sustained those injuries. I said that I had no knowledge of any injuries to my mother, and that my focus had been entirely on Lily's safety. For an hour, he tried different angles, asking about Daniel and whether I had asked anyone for help with my custody issue. Rachel interjected several times to redirect the questions back to relevant topics only. When Holt finally turned off the recorder, he stated that the investigation would continue and that charges might be filed depending on what they uncovered. Rachel thanked him professionally, and we left without another word. Teresa Alvarez from CPS showed up at my door 2 days later, armed with a clipboard and a measuring tape for the safety evaluation. She went through every room, noting potential hazards and asking about our daily routines. She opened every drawer in the kitchen and removed all timers, including the ones on the microwave and stove. She explained that anything that could trigger Lily's counting response had to be removed from her environment during her recovery. She helped me establish new mealtime routines that didn't involve strict deadlines or rules about finishing food to get more. Lily watched from the doorway, standing motionless with her hands at her sides like a tiny soldier. Teresa crouched down to Lily's level and told her that she was allowed to stop counting whenever she wanted to, without asking for permission. Lily's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't move or respond. Instead, she started counting aloud from somewhere in the 800s. Teresa made more notes and gave me a printed calendar of therapy appointments and scheduled home visits for the next month. She said that Lily's healing would take time, but removing the triggers was a crucial first step. After she left, I found Lily in her room, arranging her stuffed animals in perfect, militant rows and counting each one multiple times. 3 days later, we had our first session with Claire Bennett, the court-appointed trauma therapist for Lily's case. Her office was filled with soft colors and inviting toys, with no visible clocks or timers. For the first 20 minutes, Lily sat on the floor next to my chair, counting, while Claire calmly played with blocks nearby, not pressuring Lily to join in. Then, Lily slowly reached for one block and placed it on top of Claire's tower before quickly snatching her hand back. Claire continued to build in silence, and a few minutes later, Lily added another block. By the end of the session, Lily had engaged in play for about 10 minutes before retreating back to her counting. Claire told me this was excellent progress for a first session, and that she was optimistic about Lily's ability to heal with consistent therapy. That night, Lily woke up screaming at 2:00 a.m. She counted to 30 before falling back asleep in my arms. The next 3 nights showed similar progress. The counting episodes were shorter each time, although she still woke up terrified and drenched in sweat. Why had Holt been so focused on where I was between midnight and 6:00 a.m. when no one had mentioned anything about those specific hours? His questions about Daniel helping with the custody case were suspiciously specific, as if he already knew something we hadn't been told. Every night I sat with her, not saying a word, just being present as she worked through whatever memories were haunting her sleep. Some nights were worse than others, but the overall trend was a slow, steady improvement from thousands to hundreds, and sometimes just down to dozens. My boss called me into his office the following Monday to discuss my recent absences and late arrivals due to Lily's appointments. I explained the situation and asked about adjusting my schedule to accommodate the twice-weekly therapy sessions and other meetings. He offered me a part-time position with flexible hours, but it came with a 40% pay cut from my current salary. I accepted immediately, knowing that Lily's recovery was more important than money. I would figure out the finances later. The new schedule allowed me to pick Lily up from school every day and attend all her appointments without the stress of rushing from work. Simon Caldwell called that evening to check on Lily's progress since the hearing 2 weeks prior. He had been reviewing Claire's therapy notes and saw the improvements in Lily's play engagement and the decrease in the duration of her counting episodes. He cautioned that Lily still exhibited disturbing formulaic behaviors and rigid responses that would take months, if not years, to fully address. He was encouraged by the progress, but wanted me to understand that Lily's recovery was a marathon, not a sprint. He reminded me of the upcoming review hearing in 2 weeks and said that, based on his current observations, he would be recommending continued custody with me. The relief I felt was mixed with a deep exhaustion from the constant vigilance required to care for Lily. Rachel called the next morning with news that made my stomach drop, even though we had been expecting it. Detective Holt had informed her that the prosecutor's office was officially looking into filing assault charges against Daniel for the alleged break-in at my mother's house. She was working to legally separate my case from my brother's, as I had not yet been charged with anything. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, knowing that Daniel could face serious legal consequences for helping me rescue Lily from that basement room. Rachel assured me that she had already connected Daniel with a defense attorney who specialized in cases involving military personnel, and that they were building a strong defense. She reminded me that Daniel had made the choice to help, and I needed to focus on Lily, not on blaming myself for his situation. Teresa showed up 2 days later with a thick binder and spent 3 hours going over every inch of our house, checking cabinet locks, looking for any timers or things that could trigger Lily's counting, and taking pages of notes on what needed to be changed. She insisted I remove the kitchen timer, the alarm clock from Lily's room, and even disable the beep on the microwave, explaining that any timer sound caused Lily to freeze and start whispering numbers. Teresa laid out new mealtime guidelines. Lily could eat when she wanted and didn't have to finish anything. Bedtime could not have any strict routines that might remind her of her grandmother's lessons. The final safety plan was 12 pages long and included detailed criteria that my mother would have to meet before she could even be considered for supervised visits at a neutral facility with a social worker present. Teresa confided that she doubted that would happen for at least a year, based on what they had documented. Rachel helped me file for a protective order that same week. We sat in the courthouse waiting room for 2 hours until the judge called us in, reviewed the custody case findings and the photos of Lily's wrists, and signed the temporary order without asking many questions. The paper felt flimsy in my hands, but Rachel explained it meant my mother couldn't come within 500 feet of us or contact us in any way. If she tried, the police would arrest her immediately. Claire pulled me aside after Lily's fourth therapy session and showed me a list she had been compiling of specific trigger words that prompted Lily's robotic responses. Phrases like "good girls" or "finish your lessons" would cause Lily to become rigid and start her rehearsed scripts. Claire had a detailed plan of replacement phrases and techniques to slowly rewire Lily's reactions, starting with simply noticing when she heard the trigger words without judging herself for her response. We practiced in her office with Claire saying, "Good girls get rewards," and me immediately adding, "All kids deserve love." Lily, who was coloring nearby, simply flinched after the 20th time instead of becoming completely rigid. The following Tuesday, a process server arrived at my mother's door with the official notices of investigation from both CPS and the police department. Within hours, my phone was flooded with calls from members of her church, asking if it was true that she was being investigated for child abuse. Half of them called me a liar who was trying to hurt a good woman. But 3 different people called to say they had always thought something was off about how still and quiet the children were in her Sunday school classes. And one woman confessed she had seen my mother make a child stand in the corner for 2 hours for spilling juice at a church picnic 5 years ago. The community was split down the middle, with some forming a prayer circle for my mother, while others finally shared stories of bruises or strange punishments they had witnessed but kept quiet about. At the 30-day review hearing, Judge Whittaker reviewed all of Claire's reports on Lily's therapy progress, the CPS safety evaluations, and Simon's observations from his weekly check-ins. Lily had mostly stopped counting over 100 at night and could now eat meals without asking for permission. But she still stiffened when she heard certain phrases and had nightmares that caused her to wet the bed at least twice a week. The judge upheld all protective orders, stated he was encouraged by Lily's progress, but concerned about the lingering trauma responses, and scheduled the next review for 3 months out instead of the usual monthly check-ins, stating that the pace of healing should not be rushed. That night, I went through my phone and systematically deleted my mother's number, blocked her on all social media, and even removed her from my emergency contacts at work and Lily's school. The urge to see what she was saying or posting about me was strong, but every time I started to type her name into a search bar, I forced myself to stop and go check on Lily instead. We would make snacks, read books, or I would just sit with her while she played with her toys. 2 weeks later, Lily brought home a picture she had drawn at school. It was of our house, with bright flowers in the yard and a big, smiling sun in the sky. When I looked closer, I noticed there were no tally marks on the walls, as she used to draw. There were no dark rooms with locks, just a normal house with normal windows and a little girl playing outside. She still asked to count before bed, sitting up straight and going through the numbers, but now she would stop at 100 instead of trying to reach 10,000. And some nights, she only made it to 50 before yawning and asking for a story instead. 3 months had passed when I heard Lily giggling in the backyard. As I peeked out the window, I saw her chasing a butterfly around the garden, joyfully calling it a flutterbee, just like she used to before all of this happened. She was still seeing Claire twice a week for therapy, and she still had counting episodes when she was anxious. But hearing that funny, made-up word come out of her mouth so naturally while she was playing told me we were getting closer to finding the little girl she used to be.